Hello and welcome. My name is Maria Elena Perales, and on behalf of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, I thank you for joining us today. We are joined today by Yesenia from our Justice Office, Sisters Janet Kinney from Brentwood, Sister Trish Dolan from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, and Sister Erlinda Ramirez from Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. Today, we address the question, as people of faith, how do we begin conversation with other like-minded individuals to address immigrant needs? Today's witness is hosted by Sister Janet Kinney from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brenwood, New York. She will give witness to Sisters of St. Joseph from various congregations who volunteered accompanying the migrants at Annunciation House in El Paso, Texas. Sister Janet serves along with some of us on Sisters of St. Joseph Federation Immigration Working Group, and we also partner on a number of projects and minister to most vulnerable through our collaboration on social justice communities nationwide. Sister Janet, we are honored to have you join us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a privilege to be with all of you, Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange and associates and partners in mission, and anyone else who may be attending with us today. I'll be sharing with you an initiative that the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood are doing on behalf of our immigrant brothers and sisters. So I put a little PowerPoint together that Yesenia is just going to put up, and we're going to just begin with a little context, and then we'll move into our prayer. So I'm calling this CSJ Inclusive Love, welcoming and serving our dear neighbor, our immigrant friends. And you can move to the next slide. And this next slide, I love this image because it reminds each one of us that at our very roots, our dear Jesus and his family were also migrants, refugees, and we are all called to befriend the other. So next slide, in terms of our context, I think it's important to note that really prior to 1924, we had virtually open borders, welcoming most immigrants. And I always say that most immigrants, I refer really to most European immigrants, because certainly those of Chinese and Japanese descent were discriminated against. But for the most part, we had virtually open borders. But yet today, our immigration policy has been anything but flexible, has become more complex. And if we look back over even these last 20, 25 years, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats have not been able to reform this broken system that we have. And we have so many flawed laws at this point in our country. Today, we have over 11 million undocumented immigrants in our country. And when we look at the kind of work that they're doing, such as picking crops or home health care, they are paying $1.6 billion in taxes each year, yet they cannot receive government aid such as Social Security or unemployment because of their status, which is really a travesty. And if you just flip to the next one. And so we know that they're coming here because of horrific violence, instability, and poverty. And this, again, you know, they're leaving because they have to leave. They're leaving because they have to leave. And today there are over 3 million immigrants who are in court right now fighting their deportation. And the project that I'm going to be sharing with you today really is all about the fact that these undocumented immigrants have little, if none, representation when they want to apply for asylum in this country. And this is a great, great need of the men and women that come into our country every day seeking a safe place to be home. And we know that those who can afford attorneys have a much better chance of having a positive outcome, that is being granted asylum, than those who have to represent themselves who have no support. And that's when we speak about pro se. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit in regards to one response to this most particular need and a little bit of my journey. But before I continue, I think we're going to begin with a prayer that Sister Trish is going to offer for all of us.
God of life and compassion, we pray for my immigrant brothers and sisters, especially the refugees who have been uprooted from their homes and make difficult journeys to safety in other lands. Help us to see you, Jesus, in the faces of strangers, in the cry of children traveling to security and a better life without conflict, war, and poverty. Help us to realize that we are people of immigrants and that many of our ancestors came to the United States to escape war and poverty too. May the gifts of our gospel values help us to reach out and recognize the strangers among us, values the gift that they bring to us, and know that in journeying together, we are each enriched. God of our journey, accompany the many immigrants and refugees who are struggling for life. May we walk with one another and support them in their journey. Help us to realize that they are truly our brothers and sisters. Be with them with your love and compassion. Amen.
Thank you, Trish. And so I'm going to start my presentation now with where my journey began in serving our immigrant brothers and sisters. And it began with many of our Sisters of St. Joseph. And here you could see a picture of some of our sisters looking outward at the border fence that many, many immigrant men and women and children are faced with every day. And you can flip to the next slide. So this was back in April 2019, and there were a number of congregations that joined together to volunteer that month. And if you recall back 2 years ago, it was very similar to what it is today. The numbers coming across the border, they were coming in droves, and they could not keep up with giving them services. And a call went out to sisters across the country. And Sisters of St. Joseph, as always, responded. So there were sisters from Orange, and I'm happy to show some of these pictures. Sister Trish and Sister Elena are in them. And we had a wonderful experience together, as well as sisters from Brentwood, Philadelphia, St. Augustine, and the Congregation of St. Joseph. And we volunteered at one of the Annunciation House's newest shelters, Casa del Refugiado. And if you want to flip to the next slide. So what was Casa del Refugiado? It was an old 125,000 square foot electronic warehouse. If you think of the big Costco warehouses that some of us have in our backyards, that's exactly what it was. And 2 weeks before we arrived, Ruben Garcia, the executive director of Annunciation House, rented this huge warehouse. He had been looking for space to meet the need, and this is what he found. He was scrambling, literally scrambling. So you can move to the next slide, and we can just see a couple pictures of how he began to transform this warehouse. He recruited about 20 volunteer artists from the community who spent hours, night and day, transforming this location into a hospitable place of welcome. Isn't that a beautiful picture? And here we are. So this is where everyone would sleep. And as you can see, there's a few hundred cots here. And I would say on an average, we were welcoming between 250 and 300 individuals every day at that time, which is just a portion of the numbers of individuals that were coming over. You can flip to the next one. And here again, you'll recognize a sister from Orange, Sister Elena. We have Sister Joan from Brentwood, Sister Joni from Philadelphia, and also on the right, Sister Mary Jo of the Congregation of St. Joseph. And so when people arrived off the buses at this Annunciation House shelter, they would be seen by this intake processing team. And they would get information, they would find out who their sponsor was, all the pertinent information that we needed to help them on their next step on their journey. And they would stay at the shelter for anywhere between 24 and 72 hours. They really tried to get them out in maybe a day or two, but again, a lot of it depended on how fast arrangements could be made with their sponsors. And you can move to the next slide. And these are just some more pictures of the volunteers that worked there. So once they were, their sponsors had been identified, they had been spoken to, we would wait for the sponsor to make transportation arrangements for them. And remember, we're in El Paso, Texas here. Well, they could be going to Minnesota, they could be going to Massachusetts. So depending on the length of the journey, we would make care packages to get for them. So if they were flying on a plane and we're going to be there in a few hours, we might prepare one meal. If they were going on a bus and they were going to be on a bus for 4 days, you can multiply how many meals we would try to put together for them. So this was what you'd call the peanut butter and jelly sandwich assembly line. And to say we'd also include things like Pampers, again, all of the things that we take for granted, and these families had nothing. Most of them didn't even have any money, you know, so they were really relying upon us. So here we are, smiling away, getting them ready for their next step on the journey. So when we were there, what was also happening at the same time was this new legislation, this new law that the president at the time had passed, which was called Migrant Protection Protocols. And it actually came into being probably 4 months before we arrived in El Paso, but it really didn't have its impact until later that summer in July. And these migrant protection protocols then stopped these individuals at the border. They were no longer able to come across the border and stay at one of these shelters, whether it was Sister Norma's, the Catholic Charities, or whether it's one of Annunciation houses, or a few others that other nonprofits had sponsored along the border. And this literally dried up the number of individuals that were going into those shelters. And in fact, that huge shelter that I just showed you, actually, you would say was closed for many, many months because the numbers just weren't coming. So by the end of that year, November of 2019, there were over 56,000 asylum seekers, including 16,000 children, if you can imagine, that were sent back to wait in Mexico. So suddenly the needs for volunteers literally dried up, you know. Now, certainly the need of the immigrants had not changed, but as I say, our government was prohibiting them from entering our country. And you can switch to the next slide. So a few months later, I had a second experience and an opportunity to go back to the border. So this is now in January of 2020. And some of us are familiar with the St. Joseph Worker Program. And actually the St. Joseph workers from across the country were going to provide humanitarian aid at Sister Norma's shelter in McAllen, Texas. And I had the opportunity, and another sister of St. Joseph, Sister Susan Wilcox, some of you who may know her, she's our JPIC coordinator. We went back not to give the humanitarian aid, but actually to bear witness and to travel across the border to Matamoros, which is directly across the border from El Paso, to witness the conditions that the migrants were now facing. So here you can see the border crossing, and you'll see a few more pictures in just a moment. So you can switch to the next slide. So this was called the Witness Project, and I say Witness Project 2020. There was a gentleman by the name of Josh Rubin from Brooklyn, New York, who you may recall also in 2018, 2019, the horrific pictures that we all saw of children being held in cages in detention centers. And we all remember how once that began to be publicized, how suddenly the United States people took a very different view about what was happening in our country. And it was because of the efforts of people like Josh Rubin and others that they were able to have those child detention centers closed. There was one in Texas and there was one in Florida. So that happened in 2019 and in 2018. But then here we are now in 2020. And again, our country is doing horrible things in terms of leaving people on the Mexican border. So Josh said, I need to begin a witness project here at the border. And if you look at this picture on the left, which shows myself with Sister Norma, Sister Susan Wilcox is on my right, and we're straddled on either side by two St. Joseph workers. Look to that sign on the left, kind of incongruous. It says, "Welcome to the United States of America." Isn't that ironic? More than ironic. It's a disgrace. So here we stayed. We were there for a little over a week, and every day we would hold signs, we would talk to people about what was happening and asking people to advocate to their legislators to stop the MPP. And if you just want to switch to the next slide. So we would go across the border and as well, and I'm not showing you actual pictures. I will show you some pictures, but I'm not going to show you the actual people in the camp because we really try to preserve their confidentiality. But for instance, one of the things we saw was this at the airport. We got wind that these migrants who were being held in the camps were being taken with no due process to buses to the airport and being flown back to Central America. So not only were they being kept in Mexico, but then they were being picked up and sent back to Central America. And in some cases, they were being sent back to countries where they hadn't lived. So it was not uncommon for someone who maybe was originally from Guatemala suddenly being shipped back to Honduras. And we saw this day in and day out. And usually these were very early in the morning. These were on chartered flights. And if we weren't there, who would know? Who would know? And so maybe you want to show just this next slide. And so here I have a picture. This is on the Mexican side of the border, and you can see the military presence. And at times it would be heavy. They would be walking through the camps, kind of a little scary for the folks, if you can just imagine it. And these are simple folks just waiting patiently, trying to come across the border. And if you look a little closer at the border crossing itself, you can see the lines of people presenting themselves for asylum. And very often what would happen is they would be told to go back, their name would be put on a list, and they would then wait. They would wait here right on the riverside. And if you know anything about this area, they would have very heavy flooding. And so very often their tents would be flooded. So after a while, they would get very resourceful and they would get discarded wood. They'd make these pallets and they would raise up their tents because they could be there for months. We met families that were there for a year, had already been there for a year, and they could be there as long as 18 months, some of these folks. So here they would wait until finally they would be called and could present themselves at a hearing court. And if you could just show them the next slide, This was one of the tent hearing courts that was right there at the border. And unfortunately, I could not take pictures inside. We were allowed as US citizens to sit in on these hearings. I will tell you, as far as we were concerned, there was no due process. It was all done virtually. And this, of course, was even before the pandemic. Huge television screens, immigration judges, or rather the judges who would be hearing the immigrants' case for asylum could be anywhere in the United States. Very often, they weren't even trained as an immigration judge. They were just a judge in a court who had been assigned to listen to this particular asylee's case. And as you could imagine, 9 times out of 10, they would be denied. They would be denied. So this was the experience that I had on my second trip. So first it was on a humanitarian trip, and then it was really getting a taste of how these people were being treated and how they were not getting due process. And so now you can move to the next slide. So I returned and I said, what can I do? I wanted to do something. And so I was aware of an organization called New Sanctuary. It was in New York City, which was a subway ride away from me. I live in Queens, New York, and they assist individuals who had made it across the border with their asylum and immigration paperwork. And they trained volunteers to help them. And these volunteers were overseen by pro bono attorneys. And I also, in addition to volunteering in that clinic, being trained, I also helped accompany individuals to their immigration hearings. I was sharing this with other Sisters of St. Joseph. I'm the co-chair of our Justice Committee. And coincidentally, a number of our sisters had also been bringing people into this pro se clinic in New York City. And what did we do? We started to dream and say, you know, there's nothing like this on Long Island. And many of these people were having to travel 50, 60 miles into New York City to get this help. Because let's face it, they didn't have the money to secure their own attorney. So if they could get a volunteer to at least help them put together a comprehensive asylum application, this at least would give them another hand up, another opportunity to perhaps really get the asylum that they so desired. So here is the project that I'm about to share with you, and you can switch to the next slide. So we started to have meetings. Sister Susan, myself, and another sister of St. Joseph, Sister Rosalie, we started to reach out to other organizations, people who worked with immigrants, either doing direct service work or advocacy work. And of course, these meetings began via Zoom because this is all happening during the pandemic. So you can't say that nothing gets done during pandemics, right? So in September, we assembled a steering group. And initially it was of 9 different organizations and congregations. And 6 of those have continued to stay involved with the project, and they've now become the advisory board for this Long Island Immigration Clinic. And I just named the 6 that are there. So you can see we have anywhere from the Sisters of St. Joseph and St. Dominic, the Episcopal Diocese, a wonderful organization, Long Island Jobs with Justice, Sepa Mohair, which serves Latina women, YAM Community Resources, which serves the Haitian community, and then a host of others who are willing to support this effort. We've been getting together a number of pro bono attorneys who are willing to work with us as we open this project. So you can show the next slide. So this is a collaborative effort, and very graciously and generously, the Sisters of St. Joseph offered space to the Long Island Immigration Clinic. And if you know anything about Brentwood, Long Island, which is where our mother house is based, you would know that we are in a very large immigrant community. And so we felt that not only is the need in this immediate area, but also that the Sisters of St. Joseph is known as a welcoming place, that it would be seen as a safe space for the people who are in need of our help. So this is the building. It used to be our novitiate building. We will be sharing this building with another nonprofit who has been there for a number of years, a foster care agency. And actually, the picture on the right will be the actual entrance for the individuals who come to this program. It's a very private entrance. And again, we were concerned about the safety and security of the families and individuals we'll be serving. So I can show you the next slide. So this is the before picture. And as I said, this was our novitiate house. So of course it had its own chapel. So let's see those beautiful stained glass windows. So this is where the actual clinic space will be. And I'll say a little bit more about the structure of the clinic in a minute. You could see some of these spaces. Clearly, it has not been used as our novitiate for close to 35 years. And quick disclaimer, I was the last Sister of St. Joseph to be admitted into that building. So I helped close it. And isn't it ironic? I'm coming back to open up an immigration clinic. And so the next slide, if you can show it. So this is the after picture. So as you can see, new ceiling, new lighting, new air conditioning was installed. The pews were taken out, new carpeting was put in. That other space, we have a nice kitchenette. We have several offices, just a picture of one of them here. And we're in the process right now of furnishing this space. We've had it wired for technology. We've just hired a program coordinator, and we're hoping in November to actually launch this clinic here. So what is our mission? And if you just move to the next slide. Oh, and here's two more pictures. So that's the whole way off where all our offices are. Nice shiny floors, right? Okay, and you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So what is our mission and what we will be doing? Well, similar to that clinic that I told you I volunteered at, we're going to be training volunteers in teams of 3. And in that large space that you saw that used to be the chapel, there will be round tables throughout that room, where each team will sit at a table with the individual or family they're serving. They'll be supervised by immigration attorneys, pro bono. And to be clear, this is not a licensed legal clinic, and we will be saying that to all the individuals we will be serving. However, one of the great advantages of this is that tremendous work has to be put into these asylum applications. It can take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks of clinic sessions to put together a comprehensive asylum application. You need to not only tell their story, if you will, but you have to put in corroborative evidence, what we call country condition reports, newspaper articles, hospital reports. All of this takes several weeks to collect and assemble. So if you can only imagine an individual coming with the shirt, the shirt on their back and a few belongings, how could they possibly assemble what we require in our legal system without the help of others? And if you have no money, and you can't afford an attorney, what's the likelihood of you being successful in that asylum attempt? So that is our mission. And if you just go to the next slide. So what are they going to come here for? Well, clearly to discuss their case and just explore what are their legal options, because we know there will be some that will come that we may have to say, maybe this is not the best thing for you right now to proceed to ask for asylum, because in fact, if it's not a solid case, we certainly don't want them to be deported. In some cases, they may be coming for other types of forms of relief. They may want help with employment authorization, because after filing an application for asylum, after 150 days after that has been filed, you're entitled to apply for that. So we will assist them with that. Sometimes they may have gotten into a little trouble. And so, for instance, in the typically misdemeanor things, so they need someone to talk to say, okay, what do I need to do now? Or in some cases, which is unfortunate, They may have hired a lawyer who truthfully didn't know what they were doing, placed them in the immigration system, applied, and suddenly now they're finding themselves in court with a court order for their removal. And now they need assistance in helping to put together a case to show why, in fact, they are here. So these are the reasons that people will be coming to this clinic. We are really, really excited about it. Looking forward to the day when we can open our doors. We've been putting a comprehensive training program together for them, again, based on the other efforts we've seen. And I really look forward to sharing with you after it opens. So just to conclude, and you can move to my next slide, is I leave you with this beautiful quote that I think speaks to each one of us here, those who believe in the charism of and are part of the charism of Sisters of St. Joseph. And it's a quote from Valerie Carr's book, if you've read it, See No Stranger. And she says a beautiful thing, and I won't read the whole quote, but she says, we are all indivisibly part of one another. And she says, how can we look upon the face of anyone or anything around us, but say as a moral declaration, spiritual and cosmological and biological fact, that you are a part of me I do not yet know. And if we truly believe this, how can we not say, welcome to these United States of America? Come, be part of our family, be part of us. Thank you.
And for our reflection, how might I learn more about the gaps in services to immigrants in my community and begin the conversation with other like-minded individuals to see how we could address one of them?
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've been moved by what you have witnessed here today. We especially thank Sister Janet for sharing about her experience, and along with Sister Trish and the other rest of the sisters who participated at the border in 2019. We wish you the best, and we hope that somehow we are able to assist you, Sister Janet, in your project, in your clinic. And just that everyone be aware that if anyone wants to make a donation, please make sure that you, Sister Janet has given us the opportunity to be able to give her email. So you will get an email with her email in case anyone is interested in sending a donation or hear more about her project and want to be involved. Please feel free to do so. And we will make sure to do that in the email, as I mentioned, that would follow this presentation. So we thank you for everyone for being here today and participating. We thank Sister Linda, Sister Trish, Yesenia, and of course, Sister Janet. And to all of you, have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.